Every learning theory has advantages and disadvantages. However, there are some general advantages and disadvantages that are really prescribed to all learning theories. Common vernacular is one of the greatest advantages or strengths for a learning theory or personality theory, as it creates a common language between educators and people. This is especially true when teachers focus on one theory and use it as their educational foundation. Differentiate students. Learning theories will really aid educators in the ability to quickly differentiate students. For example, if you have a student who learns best in pairs, you can swiftly match them up with another student who is going to have that same learning preference. Simple solutions. There are many barriers to learning, which can vary across ages, cultures, religions, communities, and more. But learning theories provide options and simpler solutions, as these barriers have already been enumerated and investigated. New interventions. Learning theories pontificate a variety of interventions. As the educator investigates the differing options, they are introduced to other inventions or interventions they may not have attempted or thought of previously. This solution is really going to get them out of being stuck in a pattern of an educational boredom when the same methodologies are used over and over again. New solutions. Everyone tends to get stuck in their learning preference. For instance, if you really prefer to read, you're going to want your students to also learn by reading. But by investigating and looking at learning theories, educators are going to experience other modes of learning and additional options to present information to students. Explore the complex nature of learning process. The learning process is not a simple process. It is very detailed, extremely complex. Then to add to this, each individual is going to experience learning differently. Learning theories delve into these varying options and highlight this complex nature while providing solutions. Conversation starter. Learning theories have the ability to initiate a conversation, not only between educators, but between an educator and a learner, as well as between learners. This also extends to the conversation between educator, learner, and the caregiver of the learner. Increased learning capabilities. Applying the modalities of the varying learning theories can open doors for increased capabilities as students begin the journey of understanding their learning needs. Increased self-esteem. As individuals experience more successful learning opportunities, their self-esteem increases. On the contrast side, failed learning experiences are malignant to the individual unless they learn from them and how to turn them into positive encounters. Engaging learning opportunities. As learners and teachers, patterns arise and the same methods of learning are visited repeatedly. We do that as a learner and as a teacher. So simply stated, every learner and every educator are going to have their own preferred way of teaching and learning, but they often don't want to see the other options because we fall into a pattern. We fall into a place of comfort. Learning theories provide individuals with opportunities to investigate other ways and ways that may be more engaging, or at least pointing out to other modalities that exist. Bridging generational gaps. Individuals often complain that the generation older or younger than them simply does not understand. And learning theories are going to point out that there are methodologies of learning that are going to bridge these gaps. This will then create connections between generations as well as improving understanding. Expand preferences. Once an individual has their learning preference identified, then they can expand them. For instance, if a student must have absolute quiet, small increments of noise can be introduced to aid them in studying in busier, noisier learning environments. This obviously can be held true to all of the other varying elements of learning personalities and learning theories. Disadvantages. Too many options. Some learning theories simply offer too many options. There also then comes the combination of these options. So then you end up with too much information. And when all of this is taken into effect, it's a lot of information and it creates an extreme amount of confusion for both learners and practitioners. Unreliable instruments. A common complaint amongst educators and researchers is that they have an unreliable nature of an instrument. Simply stated, this means that the results of the testing to identify these learning personalities and learning modalities simply are not accurate. So when an individual even uses the same instrument, they may not even get the same results. So it creates extreme confusion and frustration. Learning styles often equals the doctrine of education. Basically, this means that people will prescribe one learning theory or another, and they're going to subscribe to it, and then they're going to defend it. They will dispute it. They are going to stand on that ground no matter what. The theory then becomes the foundation of all of their educational practices. It becomes difficult to dispute and even more difficult to introduce new thoughts, theories, or practices. Simplicity. So simplicity masks the complexity of learning. So learning theories have really attempted to prescribe a learning solution to all learners and all preferences. However, we already discussed this, that learning is very complex. And many learning theories simply are going to water down the process and an approach that misses out on reaching many students. It does not approach learning disabilities. Rarely do any of the learning theories look at the varying complications associated with learning disabilities, which add new dimensions to the learning. Dependency. Learning theories can be really confining. So students and educators may get to a point that they are dependent upon the methods within a specific theory without looking beyond to identify other options. It also leads to over-catering to demanded needs of students. Too confining. While some learning theories provide too many options, other theories are simply too confining and there aren't enough options to meet the needs of the student. Qualitative research methodologies. This becomes a problem because many researchers have pointed out that many of our learning theories have been based upon research methodologies with a qualitative approach. This refers to the fact that there are very few quantitative approaches that are given to support the learning theory. Commercialization of testing instruments. So learning theories generally are going to require a testing option to identify the personality or the learning style of a student or an individual. And this is then where that instrument for identification purposes comes into play. So many learning theories are going to then commercialize the testing instruments, which then requires a monetary cost. Now, the monetary cost may be for income purposes or simply to cover the cost. Despite that, it leads to a problem, quite frankly. And while the monetization does not necessarily be a bad thing, it does provide a limitation to those who do not have access to these instruments. While there are many advantages and disadvantages to learning theory, it's really under the discretion of the practitioner and the student to weigh these advantages and disadvantages and determine the usefulness of the learning style